Church from next week. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all, and a warm welcome here, especially if this is your first time visiting us. Great to have you here with us. I also want to take a moment to really not only acknowledge but appreciate those who led out in our music or worship service this morning. Christian, Elizabeth, Carol, and especially our kids. All the kids who partook in the worship this morning, can you raise your hands? You guys did an amazing job. All the worships I've ever had at this church, this was one of my favorite. So thank you for blessing us this morning with your ministry and for blessing the rest of the church. Really, really awesome. Thank you. May we see more of that. And thank you, Christian, for teaching us new songs as well. I quite like them too. Today, I want to share with you a bit of a story, a bit of a testimony in my own life that happened a few years ago, and then link it back to One Voice 27 mission and what God is calling us into as a new season of mission as a church community. And that is a journey that a few friends and I embarked on in 2012. Who wasn't born in 2012? Who wasn't born in 2012? Yeah? So you're probably thinking this is a long, long time ago, right? Yeah? Wow, the joys. I'm going to tell you guys today a story of the good old days, okay? So in 2012, I was still busy with my studies in theology in Somerset West in South Africa. And some of my best mates, we were all theology students, and we were always keen for new adventures and trying new things. And during our studies, it's very academically focused. You're always studying, you're learning Hebrew and Greek, and you're reading books after books after books. And we felt like we needed something else beyond this theoretical understanding of faith, and to actually put ourselves in a position where we had to rely on God a lot more. So myself, along with two other mates, Edrich, and some of you guys might know him, Hloni, we decided to hitchhike from one part of the country to the other. So we decided, this was in our mid-semester break in theology, and there was a youth camp that was happening kind of in the middle of the country, but it was around 1,500 k's away. So we decided to embark on a faith adventure and pretty much hitchhike all the way to this youth camp. And the challenge was we weren't going to bring anything with us. So we were students, so it's not like we had money to bring anyways, so that wasn't a worry, but we weren't going to bring any cash or anything with us. If we had, we might have, but we didn't, so that was kind of taken care of. We decided to not use any transport, or not transport, but know where we were going or plan any accommodation, or even our route. We knew where we wanted to go, and we had kind of earmarked about 2 weeks that we needed to get to this destination. And so we didn't bring any food with us. Well, that was the plan in the beginning. And we weren't going to plan where we were going to stay. We didn't really know anyone either. So this was an adventure that we would pretty much take one day at a time, a step in faith, one moment at a time. And we said wherever we go, we want to perform at least 5 random acts of kindness wherever we go each day. So that could look like maybe helping a lady carry her groceries from her car or from the grocery store to her car, or maybe helping someone along the way who we felt might have needed some encouragement that day. So 5 random acts of kindness everywhere we went. And so we embarked in the middle of winter. Now, South Africa, we might picture as a place full of sun and warmth, and it is very much a lot of that, but where we were leaving from, and especially heading to, in the middle of winter, in all honesty, it probably gets colder than many places, even in the South Island. even if there's no snow. So it was freezing in the middle of winter, in the middle of probably nowhere, one of the most inhospitable and inhabited places in the country. And we were hitchhiking 1,500 k's from one destination to the next. And so this is a photo of the first day of this hitchhiking adventure, departing. And when we left, a few of the church members felt sorry for us and gave us like 2 kilos of food each, which we were kind of mixed about because our bags already weighed like 25 kilograms. And then we got given another 2 kilograms each, and it was extremely uncomfortable and extremely heavy. Now, before we embarked on this, I must say, in the back of our minds, we thought that God was just going to provide everything for us. We would ask something and it would just happen, because that's what faith is, right? God will just do everything that we ask. And day one was a reality check. So we were asking people for lifts the whole way, and we were in the back of our minds expecting to walk from no more than maybe a couple of k's and get a lift from one place to the next. Well, hour by hour went by, and no one was stopping to pick us up. And we continued walking and walking and walking. At the end of day one, we had walked around 40 kilometers, and we were absolutely broken. And we didn't know where to stay. We hadn't thought that far. We just thought that doors would open. So we arrived at a place, and the only real safe place in this area was a police station. So we walked into the police station and said, well, can we maybe sleep over here? At first, they were somewhat concerned. That's not why we're here, or not what we're here to provide. But after a few negotiations, they said, yeah, you can stay here overnight, but you're not allowed to sleep on the floor. You have to sleep in the chairs, right? And we got absolutely zero sleep that night. Police were bringing in people weird odd hours of the night. We were being woken up, and we were tired, broken, miserable. So the beginning of that second day, all of us, we got together, the three of us, and said, maybe this was a bad idea, and it's not too late to turn around. At one phone call, we could just call one of our other friends, mates, or church members, and they can come fetch us, bring us home, and we repent of our sins. We decided, however, to keep going. And so we started walking that morning. We had actually asked the police station if they could give us a lift from one place to the next. And they said, no, we don't provide that kind of service either. So we put our backpacks on and grudgingly started walking again and got a couple k's down the road. And the police stopped us and said, we feel sorry for you guys. We will help you go to the next place. And so here are a couple of pastors, three of us in the back of a police van, being transported from one destination to the next. And this happened over and over again. We didn't know where we were going to stay, where we were going to sleep, what we were going to eat necessarily. But we did say wherever we went, we would do 5 random acts of kindness. So that was our challenge everywhere we went. And it's so interesting to see how doors began to open as we begin to do this stuff. So we arrive at our next destination, and we're in town, and it might be around 11 or 12 o'clock in the day. And we've still got a long way ahead of us, but we figured this is where we are now. So let's settle in and let's see how we can just try and help or bring a bit of light to our community that day. And so we started to do a few things. I think the one day we went into a hospital and just visited a few people. We asked the hospital if we could visit people who might feel like they needed a visit or were lonely or had no family around them. And I remember the one time we walk into this hospital and they direct us to a couple of people who needed a visit. And one of the nurses, obviously were intrigued by our story because we're in this hospital with our backpacks on and here to visit people, and asked us about our story and why we're here and what we're doing, and said to us, well, what are you guys going to eat tonight and where are you going to sleep? And we were just all like, well, we're still figuring that out. No, man, you can't do that. Come stay with us. And then she would invite us into her home, and we ate a nice 5-star meal And how are you going to get from this town to the next? Well, we kind of also figuring that out. Well, I've got a mate who works in the next town. He's a farmer, and he normally drives through every morning. So I'll ask him if he can give you a lift. And this is not recommended from a health and safety point of view, but there was one of us in front and two of us on the back on that setup. In the middle of winter, going like 300 kilometers, right? So extremely cold and deeply uncomfortable. But this just enabled us to just have meaningful, genuine conversations and chats with people around us, to listen to their stories, to lean into their struggles, their hopes, their aspirations, and for them to also ask the same of us. And so we started to slowly but surely gain momentum. We got into this routine and started to trust in God more and worry less about what we would eat, where we would sleep, or whether we would even get from one destination to the next safely. I remember we arrived in, I think this was somewhere in Senekal, for those of you guys who might know. And one of our random acts of kindness kind of just stumbled upon us. We were walking through the community, and we passed an orphanage. And we asked if we could maybe just come in and sing a few songs with them, tell the kids a couple of stories, and maybe play some sport with the kids. And so they welcomed us in. And at this orphanage, we played with the kids a bit, told a few stories. And again, the owner of the orphanage said, well, what are you guys eating tonight? And where are you going? And how are you going to get from one place to the other? And us three young students were just like, well, we're figuring that out. God has led us so far. And doors just began to open wherever we went. We could see how God was leading. And it was very formative in my own experience about faith. Not presumption. We still had to plan. It didn't mean we didn't have to do hard work. It didn't mean that we didn't spend many, many kilometers of walking in rain, in difficult conditions, or even going hungry. There was much of that. But we never once slept on the corner of a street, and we never once didn't have God provide for us on this journey. There was one particular experience, and this was also in our journey, and again, it involves the back of a ute, I guess, right? And during this experience, we were walking in the middle of nowhere. Literally, a farmer dropped us off at his farm, and we were in the middle of nowhere, and we just had to keep walking. And the next town was maybe a couple of 100 kilometers away, quite far. We didn't know where we were going to sleep that night, and we were getting a little bit worried as it was getting around 5 o'clock, and it was freezing cold. And this guy in a ute drove past us, and he said to us, oh, I saw you guys like 3 days ago, hundreds of kilometers back in the other direction. What on earth are you guys doing? Are you crazy? Where are you headed? So we told him where we were going, which was a town called Dundee. And he said, oh, well, I'm not going there, but I'm going reasonably close, and I can bring you with us, right? So we hopped in. Two of us in the back, whoever drew the short straw, and had a couple of blankets over us to keep us reasonably warm. And halfway through, now two of us were in the back and another mate of ours was in front, and we stopped at a destination. We didn't really know still where we were going. We heard through our mate and through him that he had basically invited us to stay over at his place for the night. And so we did. And he told us a story of how just the night before, and this is an example of how God moved in miraculous and wondrous ways. He had told us the night before that he was in the pub, and he's been going through a very difficult time. He lost his partner to cancer not too long before this, and he was just at the end, right? He didn't know where to turn to next or really what the purpose of all of this was. And the very night before, he was in the pub. And he said he just came to the end of the road, drunk and inebriated. And he said, if there is a God, just send me a sign. But he said it not really believing in what he was asking for. And the story goes, he said he didn't really expect that sign to be 3 pastors on the side of a road, right? And so we had a great night, and he fed us, and we developed a connection and friendship with him. So much so that every day he would, after this, check in and find out how it was going, where we were. And another mate of mine ended up doing Bible studies with him for a period of months after this, which was also just an amazing experience. But how in the middle of this journey, we figured we're here to help people to step out in faith, even if we don't know what that might look like, and how God had almost gone before us and opened those doors. A person who was at the end of his road had asked God for a sign. And here, I wouldn't say we were the sign, but here were 3 young Christian people, open and willing to God's leading, who were there at the right time, at the right place, who could then answer a prayer that he had prayed in a state that he could barely even remember the previous night. And so this happened over and over again. Around 12 days later, we arrived in our destination, and that's the photo of the 3 of us. Tired, broken, and we had probably also lost a few kilograms along the way. Our bags were significantly lighter by the end of it, which we were grateful for. But this is an experience that I will never, ever forget. So many miraculous things happened during this journey. I have to keep this limited because of time, and I could go on and share many other stories in a lot more detail, but then we'd probably actually have to do a series out of this, right? But just want to share a few stories of this to tell you about how God provides for us when we ask for him, and that stepping out in faith asks a lot of us. And it doesn't always mean that things will always go according to plan, or that we'll always have it the way we think we would like God to work in our lives. But God works in mysterious and beautiful ways. Again, we arrived at our destination. We didn't go hungry, although there were moments we did get hungry. We didn't have to spend a single cent that whole trip, right? We spent no money. And at the end of it, we thought this is a far better way to travel from one destination to the next, especially as students, right? But God opened doors. And I want to bring this back home for us, and I want to anchor it in a text in Isaiah 43. We're going back a few years ago for me. Some of you guys weren't even born. But I want to talk about how the God who moved then in my life and the God who has moved in many of our lives here can also still move in our midst today. So I want to share a few words from Isaiah chapter 43. Isaiah is kind of in the middle of our Bibles, and it's found in the Old Testament. But before we get into it, I just want to kind of set the scene or context here behind Isaiah 43. Before we actually read it, to actually understand the passage that I would like to share with you guys this morning, we need to know the context in which the words which I'm about to share are actually spoken in. The passage I would like to read for us this morning comes from a part of the Bible called Isaiah. And it's worth knowing who exactly Isaiah was as a person, because he's more interesting than the name suggests. Isaiah was a prophet. Now, when we hear prophet, we usually picture someone who predicts the future, a kind of pious fortune teller, perhaps. But that's not really entirely accurate. A prophet in biblical times, a prophet in the Bible, was more like a truth teller, someone who felt that he or she had been handed a message from God and actually couldn't keep quiet about it. A messenger who had to share what God had placed on his or her heart. So when you think prophet, think maybe part poet, part protester, part messenger. And Isaiah called out the powerful when they were trampled on by when they trampled on the poor. Isaiah named injustice out loud when it was easier to stay silent. Isaiah was a truth teller. Isaiah was a messenger. And God called this man, Isaiah, to be a messenger right in the middle of some of the darkest moments of Israel's history. And it's into that darkness that Isaiah spoke and brought a message of hope. And so the year is around 586 BC. My moment was in 2012. We're going back quite a few years. And in 586, a foreign empire by the name of Babylon marched into Jerusalem. They flattened Uzziah and his people's capital city, brought it to ruins and rubble and dust, and they burned down the temple. Now, this temple that was burnt down wasn't just another building. It was far more significant than that. This temple was the one place on earth where God's people believed and felt that this is where we commune and meet with God face to face. This temple is a place where heaven and earth met together. It was the center of everything in their lives. And now, this temple, which symbolized God's presence, God's promises, God's well-being and endearment towards his people, was no longer there. Gone, reduced to rubble. And then once Jerusalem was destroyed and brought to ashes, all of these survivors were rounded up, and then they were marched off more than 1,000 kilometers away from their home, Jerusalem. And they were brought to live in the land of the people who had just conquered them. God's people, all of them, all of these survivors, were now living in exile. And they were living in a hostile land. You wake up every morning and you wake up in the wrong country, surrounded by the wrong gods, and wondering at the same time if the God that you trusted, right, had simply given up on you. Because where are you now, God? Where were you when we needed you? Or worse, maybe God has forgotten about us entirely. If you're here in church for the first time today, you might not even perhaps believe in this story, and that's okay. You don't have to believe to belong in our community. We're just glad to have you with us here today. But perhaps you can resonate with the reality that this passage, this story that I'm about to read, is at least alluding to. People placed hope and people placed trust in God. They relied on a sense of collective memory about the great things that God had supposedly done for them in the past. But where is all that now when it actually counts? Like, we need you now, God. We've heard you do amazing miracles for us in the past, but where is the temple? You promised that we would be a great people living in the promised land, and we are no longer either. Where are you in the midst of all this? Where is all that now when it actually counts? Have you given up on us, God? Can you even be trusted? Do you even see me? Do you even know what my real struggles are at this moment in time or what I'm going through? In fact, do you even care? God, are you even real? I mean, if you were real, none of this would have happened in the first place, right? These are the kind of questions, these are the kind of doubts, and dare I say, the quiet struggles that were sitting underneath the passage that I'm going to read to you today. Because this is God speaking to people who are homesick, people who are defeated, and who are living on memories of how good things used to be back in the day, relying on the sense of nostalgia almost. And it had been so long since they had seen God do anything that for most of them, this wasn't even a memory anymore. It was just a story, a fable. This generation in Isaiah chapter 43 was born in the wrong country, surrounded by a world that contradicted everything they'd been told about their Creator or their God. And so they survived the only way that they could, by clinging on to one story, told and retold until it felt almost too good to be true. Once upon a time, they were slaves in a land called Egypt, and God set them free. He split the Red Sea, walked them out, and carried them all the way home. And the hope buried in the story was simple. If God did it then, surely he could do it again. Israel survived on this one story, the story of Exodus, where God delivered his people from slavery, from exile, and walked them into the promised land. Journeying through the Red Sea that God split open, the miracle of all miracles. This was the story that was told and retold. But now the questions are different. If you did it then, God, why can't you do it now? Where are you now? If you could do great things back then, why can't you do those kind of things for us today? I mean, we still have faith in you. We still want to trust in you. We still love you. We still believe in you. But we don't see you moving like you did back then. And so this is where they're at. And I want to read to you the story in Isaiah 43, 14 onwards. I am the Lord, God says, who opened a way through the waters, making a dry path through the sea. I called forth the mighty army of Egypt with all its chariots and horses. God did all these things. But then the story takes a turn and a twist no one saw coming. I did all of that. But hang on, forget all of that. It is nothing compared to what I am going to do. For I am about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through this wilderness that you find yourselves in. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland. Yes, I'll make rivers in the dry wasteland so my chosen people can be refreshed, restored, made whole again. I have made Israel for myself, and they will someday honor me before the whole world. God says, you remember what I did then, right? Those great miraculous things that I did for you. Remember how I provided for you back then? Yeah, God, how can we forget? This is a story we've told to ourselves over and over and passed on from one generation to the next. And then God turns the story on its head and says, forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past, because God is up to something new. God is doing something new in your midst. Do you see it? Can you smell it? Can you perceive it? Look at what God is about to do for you. And so as important and formative as that memory was, what God had done for them all the way back in Egypt, in the Exodus, God was asking them to remember, not by looking backwards, but by looking forwards. Yeah, God did this then, but this is a stepping stone. If God did this then, can you imagine what he's about to do for you now? But this is important, because you need to understand it against the backdrop of a people who had forged their whole identity around this one singular story. Was God asking them to forget the Exodus? Right? It was one of the most important events in their entire lives. It shaped their identity, it kept them alive, and it gave them a sense of purpose. How on earth are we supposed to forget something like that? God did amazing things for me when we were on that faith trip, right? Journeying from one part of the country to the other. Amazing things. I can't forget that. So in what sense are you asking us to move on, Lord? What sense are you asking us to forget, perhaps? I think this is really what this story or narrative is really trying to drive home. Personally, I don't think that God is trying to erase our past. I don't think he's trying to erase our memory. I don't think he's trying to erase the experiences that we've had with him, or even in church for that matter, that have been formative to shaping our own sense of identity or purpose or meaning, or that have kept us alive spiritually in church and in our walk with God. God is not asking us, I don't think, to erase our past and forget about it. But I do think that he's saying that we shouldn't camp there. Because God is doing something new. God wants to do something new. And if we're constantly living back then, or relying on that to sustain us today, then God's like, well, it's a bit like bread. There's a sell-by date on it. And faith is a living experience, one that is present, not something that we only turn to or rely on that happened 20 years ago or 15 years ago. We need faith today. So he's not erasing the past, but he's saying don't camp there. For the simple reason, I think, that yesterday's miracle was never meant to be today's resting place. We cannot rely on our past experiences or memory to carry us forward in our walk with God. Don't forget them, but faith needs to be rooted and anchored in the here and now so that we can be open to the ways in which God is moving and speaking in our midst today. Nostalgia is great. Nostalgia, in many ways, might feel like faith, but it is not always faith, because faith is a present tense word. It is renewed every single morning, every single moment of the day. So I want to challenge us as a community, as individuals. I'm not asking you to do the TA trail, right, starting tomorrow and just do it by faith, right? I'm not asking you to hike from one part of the country to the other or just leave your job or whatever that might be, all right? I am asking you to maybe be open to the ways that God is moving in your life today, that God is maybe calling you and inviting you to have more faith in Him. Oh, but Lord, if I take that leap of faith, I don't know, if you're going to provide for me. I don't really know if I can do that. I don't know if I trust you enough. I don't know if I'm capable enough. We all have these hesitations and doubts. I have them. But maybe, if anything, if we can learn anything from the people in the Bible and in God's story of old, is that we all wrestle with the same questions, but we are also asked to take that leap of faith. When we do that, to see the ways in which God will open the door for us, to be intentional about taking those next steps, not to just say, Lord, I'm just going to jump off the side of a building and hope you'll catch me. Lord, I'm just going to get into a car and I'm just going to drive, and because I have faith in you, I don't need to put my safety belt on. Come on now. Use common sense. We need to do these things, right? We need to prepare. There's stuff that we need to do ourselves. But that doesn't mean we still can't take a step out in faith, to trust in God's leading, to try new things. Maybe that might look like reaching out to someone at work that you've kind of thought, oh man, I need to do this for a while, but I just feel, I don't know where to start the conversation. I don't know how to approach it. I don't even know if they're open to receiving a conversation around faith. I want to challenge you to take that leap of faith. Whether it be in your work environment, your home environment, your school environment, to take that leap of faith and trust God. And so I ask this question for us today. In what ways or areas is God asking you to step out in faith? Because yesterday's faith is not sufficient for mission today. Mission needs living faith. Memory is not the enemy of faith. Remember what God did for you yesterday. Remember what God did for you in 2012. Remember what God did for us as a community 20 years ago. Remember what God has done for you as recently as last week or last month. This is the soil in which faith grows stronger. And so nostalgia, the good old days, what God has done for us back in 2012 or last month or last year, these things are formative. We need to remember well, because when we remember well, it shapes us in return. But there are two different ways or two kinds of remembering. One moves us forward, and the other holds us in place almost as a prisoner of time. Faith is the first kind. Faith looks back at what God has done for us, like the Exodus, and with us. And faith looks back at what God has done for us, right? Precisely so that we can learn from that and be perceptive to how God is moving in our lives for the future. Memory itself, remembering, is meant to be a compass, not necessarily a cul-de-sac. And so the moment our remembering only points backwards, it stops being faith and starts becoming something like a museum. And I love museums. They're a great place to go to. We need museums. But if we gather around a museum for too long, whatever that moment might be, that Exodus moment in your life, if you gather around that moment for too long, if you camp there and they're alone, then you, me, and we risk the God who has already moved ahead of us and who is inviting us to move forward. But we can't see it because we are camped back at the moment God did something for us all the way back then. It could be as far as 2012, or even way further back, or it could be yesterday. Yesterday's miracles were never meant to be today's resting place. Here is the irony, and this is our collective memory as a Seventh-day Adventist Church. We are a people, interestingly enough, named after and named for what is yet to come. Adventists. We remember the Exodus. We remember how God has moved in the past. We remember the cross. We remember the empty tomb. We remember how God has started this movement back in 1844. But we also believe at the same time that every one of those same memories actually leans forward in its posture. Our very name calls us to lift our eyes up to what lies before us. And in this world full of conflict, injustice, suffering, struggle, at the far end of this wilderness that we find ourselves in, this wilderness that is right in front of us, we as Adventists can already see streams of living water that are flowing down from the throne of God, especially in this dry and weary land. Yet, I guess in this, just as we find in Isaiah 43, there is a word of caution. Because we can grow to be so attached to our past or how we did things in our own lives or collective journey 20 years ago that we mistake where our faith started with its actual summit. We can begin to treat church culture and tradition, the tradition of yesterday, as the destination itself rather than the doorway that God once walked through to meet and connect with each and every single one of us here today. For sure, God met us there. God communed with us. God ate with us. God connected with us. God visited us back then in those times, in the good old days. But the form and shape our faith took then was never meant to be a fence around how He is allowed to move in our lives today. Because heritage is a road, not necessarily a residence. The God who met our pioneers in 1844 did not retire in 1844. The God who met us in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s and 2010s did not stop moving then. He did not ask us to stand guard over our memories and nostalgia. He asked us to get up and look forward to what lies ahead of us. And the direction He points is always outwards from Himself, towards the world around Him that God is trying to reach. To look at new doorways God is walking through to meet with our youth today. And we can see that through a beautiful song service that we witnessed. New doorways He's walking through to connect with those who may be averse to church or faith altogether. God, I think, invites us to remember, and to remember well, but ultimately to fix our gaze on the road that lies ahead of us. And I think we've spoken a little bit about 1 Voice 27, about the season of mission that is ahead of us. This is not about breaking from our heritage, but rather I see it as the next mile of that same road. Our pioneers carried this message as far as their generation could. And I will carry that message as a young adult as far as I can. But there will be a point I can carry it no more. And we will need others to pick it up and carry it further, to connect with new ways, new generations, in new ways and new contexts. And so the question ultimately I think that God is asking us, for us today, is will we pick this moment, will we pick up this message of living water and keep walking forward? And while walking forward, perceive all the things that God is up to in our own world, in our midst and time today. God is moving in ways that sometimes we aren't necessarily ready for or even open to seeing, but He is at work. So what are the ways that God is working in our midst, in today's culture, context, people, in our own communities, whether it be our workspaces or school environments? What is God up to in those areas? And as I close, to remember ultimately, guys, I don't think God is asking us to forget the nostalgia of our past. I remember back on my student days with incredible fondness. They were amazing times in my life. I will always keep going back to them. They were formative in shaping my identity, purpose, meaning, calling for that matter. But I need to make a conscious day-by-day effort not to camp there in my own faith. Because if I do, I risk closing myself off to the ways that God is trying to move in my life today. The people that God places right in front of me that He is asking me to connect with. But because I'm so focused on what God did yesterday, I close myself off to the moments He is speaking to us today. So I think that He's not asking us to forget those moments. I don't think that God is asking us to erase our past and these amazing memories that have shaped us. But I do think that He's challenging us not to camp there, for the simple reason that yesterday's miracle was never meant to be today's resting place. And so in order for faith to be alive and living, it always needs to be on the move. What ways is God asking you to step out in faith today and over the course of the next week? Amen.